Okay, we're live from beautiful downtown Austin, or actually North Austin, Doubletree Hotel. We have with us as the next presenter, Colonel John Alexander, PhD, a real interesting speaker with a real interesting background in rather non-standard weapons development research, and he's an interesting guy with that, and he's also interesting because he has certain associations with unnamed people or something. I'm going to plant a rover. How about that? Okay. With that in mind, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Colonel Alexander, who has a presentation to talk about the conspiracy stuff. Keep in mind my admonition this morning about this. Okay, I wrote you that in advance. Okay. Take it away, Colonel.
Hail! The Lord spoke unto me and told me to come forth and tell you the truth. And we have fought the great battle against the forces of darkness. We have fought against the valiant, the government, the trilateralists, the Bilderbergers, whoever. And we have come forth now, and we are going to set you free, for the truth shall set you free. And if you're going to play in the realm of paranormal phenomena, you had better understand conspiracy theory. Because quite frankly, I don't care what side of it you're on, you become part of it. You're either one of those who are doing it, whatever it is, or if you deny it, then automatically you're part of the cover-up of whatever it is. And it becomes an absolutely no-win situation. And it certainly applies to remote viewing and remote influence, as we've heard. I'm going to talk about some current conspiracies. You missed all the good stuff. I don't usually go into the acting and all of that sort of thing. More mundane kind of lecturing and whatnot. If you look at conspiracies, what's been going on, for instance, let's take 9/11. I mean, I put that as kind of a breed apart. The conspiracy theories that came out are still coming out, evolving out of this, are making mainline headlines. I mean, this is not just in the underground, started kind of in the underground newspapers and websites and things like that, and has moved up to full-fledged. We have Congress people calling for hearings. What did the president know, when did they know it, and all of that. Everybody knows 5,000 Jews did not go to work that day because they knew that the Mossad was going to destroy the Twin Towers in order to drive a wedge between us and the Middle East. By the way, there's a huge number, if you follow the site, actual interviews that have taken place with people in the Middle East. There are a large group of people from those countries that actually believe that is the case. What I predicted within just a few hours of watching the events unfold was that you would find, sure enough, that all of the information necessary to have put this piece to the puzzle together was available before 9/11. And in retrospect, we found, sure enough, information was there and it was available, resident in different agencies. Not to be too political, but I blame the last administration who had decimated the intelligence community. And the point was, there was nobody to read the mail. The mail was there, but there was nobody to read the mail, put the puzzle together. Don't know if we're going to be able to, grow out of that or not. Relatively recently, there was no lunar landing. That's kind of amazing. And I think I've got here. As you may remember, we actually had Fox News with a special on the Great Moon Hoax. I happen to know a number of the people who actually walked on the moon, and most of them come back and say, gee, I thought I was there. You know, maybe they used hypnotic trance or something like that and put them under so they didn't realize that they really hadn't gone anyplace, and it was at a lunar site in, I guess, Hawaii was where they did some of the training. But you end up with, you know, educated people actually running programs. Now with Fox, I think what they were really looking for ratings and that. But you find very serious people saying, maybe we really didn't go to the moon. And there's problems when we get involved in these sorts of things, when it starts getting to a level where it's affecting policy. The next one that I have up there, the CIA created AIDS. Now, that's been running around for quite a while, and there's people who actually believe that. Human sacrifices are rampant in the U.S. This debate is kind of interesting because I had this with a rather well-known psychiatrist who really went on and on about how people would they were generating babies so they would be available for sacrifice, and the great they are involved. Anytime you would try to run down where, you know, he said, well, where are the bones? You know, in this case, quite literally. Well, they're all taken away, and they're from people who didn't have a history, and they're being raised for these purposes, and you go, you know, this just doesn't make sense. Went on to tell about some personal history that had happened that would have caused major physical scarring. And you say, where are the scars? And it's like, you know, no amount of physical evidence that is to the contrary can convince them that these things are just not accurate. Now, they are controlling your mind. And this is probably where the remote viewing aspect comes into it. Because the great they, the people who were trained there, they not only, you know, were developing to some degree a way to access information at a distance in that, but to influence minds. And of course, mind control becomes a major piece of this. What happens when scientists look at this? And one of the problems we have is that when people take a set position, it is very, very difficult for them to go then and change their mind and take a different position. I might give you an example of Ray Hyman. Many of you know him from the skeptics, the psychops situation. And Ray and I have had some very interesting discussions dealing with various kinds of phenomena. And one-on-one, privately, he's quite rational and explains, oh, maybe this, maybe that. When you get to what he's written, you cannot get him to reverse his position, and he comes out with these very negative kinds of connotations to it. And we do have problems, the difference with skeptics and debunkers. I can't. Excuse me just a minute. Yes, I understand. It is going as planned. You have a problem. I think healthy skepticism is something that's very valid. And in fact, I would consider myself to be a skeptic. And there's a huge difference between skeptics and debunkers. And one of the problems that you have is that you have debunkers who are debunking everything and understand who they are and what they're doing. Skeptics, I think, are ones who come in and want to ask legitimate questions. Now, of course, one of the standard phrases in any conspiracy theory, they always say, well, I was skeptical, but then, you know, this series of strange events started happening, and then I became better known. and to understand the situation. There's a host of things. I gave this talk last year, so I just wanted to really reference it because I know we have a number of people here who have not been present at some of the other some of the other conferences. But there's, how do you deal with them? Now, one of the things they do is to say, first of all, the white crow phenomena you're probably familiar with, but, they just ignore them. Ray Hyman, again, for an example, it was at Cleve Baxter. Cleve you're going to be hearing tomorrow. But we have the National Academy of Science in. A very strange event happened right in front of them. And that never made the report. It's like even the white crow flew and they saw it, totally ignored at that time. So what they do is they tend to be centrist and deal with the way the phenomena is for the most part. They end up excluding personal observations. It's kind of interesting. I was listening the other day the Van Dam trial and saying there's no hard evidence, there is no eyewitness. Now frankly, eyewitness testimony is pretty bad. And yet in courts it's considered to be pretty good, even though they know it. But when you get into phenomenology, it is automatically excluded. I saw this happen, I saw that happen. Obviously, you must have been misled in some way. And then they also generalize and say, well, everybody knows that can't be true, therefore it isn't. And the biggest problem when you're dealing with skeptics, no matter what facts you choose to deal with, is that you're really you must understand you're dealing with their belief system. One of the best books on UFOs, by the way, I believe was written by or edited by Carl Sagan. It was called UFOs, A Scientific Debate. And if you go in and you read it, what you find the proponents said, here are the facts. Here's what we saw, here are the measurements, here are what people reported, here's how we did it. You went to the opponents and they said, oh, it can't be, therefore it isn't, why? It was a totally emotional debate. Now, what I find most interesting about that is that Sagan, the famous statement that goes on, the billions and billions, they must be out there, but there's not one shred of evidence to support that, which is really kind of amazing when you go back and you look at his book, and there are certainly things that must be qualified as shreds of evidence. So they just totally ignore that. Now, one of the problems that we have, I believe, in this whole area is this whole notion of secrecy. And one of the better books is kind of interesting. Patrick Moynihan is not a guy that I'd normally be philosophically aligned with, but he wrote a book on secrecy. And one of the key issues here, the last bullet, conspiracy theories have been part of American culture for 2 centuries. But it extrapolates. I mean, we've always had dissenters in the United States. I mean, that's been our history. We broke off from England because of our differences and whatnot. He says, but we've seen the grown to new dimensions. And so we have moved from dissenters being, the oddballs in thousands or tens of thousands into millions of people who actively distrust the government. Think there's a reason for secrecy. Part of it is that there's a preservation of security. Quite frequently, it's to prevent embarrassment, and we're finding even now, if you look about some of the 9/11 things, like why didn't certain information come out earlier than that? It was, we're kind of embarrassed to say, gee, we found it sitting in the drawer, and it should have gone to someplace in that. But the bottom line is really the key one, and that is knowledge is power. And by having secrets inside various organizations, what you do is accrue power. And there are legitimate secrets. I think the notion that we're going to take on Saddam Hussein on, pick your date, March 17th of 2003, probably ought to be secret. By the way, just so you're sure, I just made up that number out of the air. I have no knowledge as to what it might happen or not. But the point is, if you're going to do something where people's lives are at risk, Those kinds of things ought to be secret. But too much general knowledge is put into secrecy bins. Now, this reiterates, again, for just a few people, I'm not going to dwell at any time on that, there are very formalized ways that the government sets up secret. There are certain categories. The biggest one you see up there is above top secret. There is no such category as above top secret. And if you understand the system and how it works, there are basically three categories. There's a bunch of different, there's caveats. There are segments that are limited by definition. Just because you have a secret clearance, a top secret clearance, doesn't mean that you automatically have access to all top secret or secret information, whatever it is. And these are very formalized processes. But when you get into conspiracy theories, well, it was secret and they did this, and it's all hidden behind the black budget is the key thing there. But understand that those processes are really very, very formalized. I give a couple of very quick examples. Let me drop down to, well, the one that was personal was the Tet Offensive. I happened to live through Tet of '68, and I was in the Delta running a Special Forces camp, and we had no idea that was about to come off. And it wasn't until 60 Minutes came out with a program against Westmoreland and Danny Graham that we had been on the front lines there, found out, hey, these guys in Saigon knew about this for a long time and let it happen without warning the folks in the field. So that was a good example of, we were really blindsided down there. The SDI director, I was in briefing him on a topic one time, and we showed him some documents. Had to do with our ability to intercept technology. And they were looking at it, and we were looking at Soviet statements verbatim. And he goes, how did you get this? You must have been listening to the phone calls. We said, yeah, they're listening to the phone calls. And we said, can they do that? I said, yeah, they can do that. Wow. Here's a guy that was a 3-star general at the time, running the biggest program in the government, a $5 billion program, who was totally out of the loop as to capabilities for collection of intelligence. And the point is, they get into these little secret conclaves. Nobody ever told him. The remote viewing program was one of the worst kept secrets. There were a number of articles about it. But the problem that I think emerges from that is that you breed these conspiracy theories, and I think that really is a threat to national security. Now, I'm going to go in and probably offend a lot of people. I promised I'd piss everybody off before I was done, so there probably won't be any nerves I don't hit at some point here. I was going to look at how Sci responds to science, and we're going to look at the good, and I want to focus here on the bad, the ugly. I use Stephen Greer's Discover project. Some of you are probably familiar with that. By the way, most of it's bogus. It's an interesting combination where he's got a few good witnesses, but some of the key ones that you've heard a lot about just are not real. Sorry about that. They're absolutely not real. But from the conspiracy perspective, I'm going to talk about what's called my labs. If you're not familiar with it, I'm going to go through it a little bit. My labs, the hypothesis goes that it's not aliens that are running around abducting people, it's the military abduction. What they do is they go in and they cloud your mind. And it varies between some and all. Now, the guy by the way is Helmut Lammer. I'm going to come back to him. He's an Austrian astrophysicist who put out a series of articles. Interesting, MUFON, if you're familiar with that, the Mutual UFO Network magazine actually spent, I think, a whole article or two based on it. And what they said was that, the military is going around doing this. And the way they do that is that they've got these little biochips that are implanted in people, and that from that they can keep track of where they are, and they go out there and they snatch them up. And contrary to what you've been reading, because if you read in the papers within the last couple of months, such chips are now available, if you believe them, they've had these for decades, and they've been available. And the way this is developed is the infamous black budget. With the black budget, which is, trillions, I guess, you can accommodate anything. And again, but this does get back to the secrecy where you don't understand how much money is out there and when it can be available. That the memories, one of the things we have here, most of the memories are recovered memories. And I won't get into the whole issue of that when we have seen those kind of problems in a host of areas, including breaking up families and things like this, where they remember a lot of abuse from parents or aunts, uncles, other people in the family and whatnot. But that somehow we believe that these memories of these strange events are accurate. Most of them are recovered, usually with hypnosis. Now, interestingly, is why would you do such a thing? First of all, it's mind and behavior experiments. Sometimes it's to do biological or genealogical research. And the other hypothesis is to get information about the real aliens that are going on. Now, if you look at these with any degree of logic, you say, the technology just has not been there for that long. We barely have the constellations up, the microchip technology and whatnot, and yet these abductions have been, as I said, going on for decades. If it were available, how come we can't find Osama bin Laden? I mean, we've known about him as a problem for a hell of a long time. How come we couldn't find Saddam Hussein? We have all of this brain power out there and high technology that's out trying to find somebody, and yet we cannot find people who are of national interest to us. Now, here's one that will irritate everybody that's been involved. These are not special people. If I'm running a program and I want to find out something about certain kinds of populations, for instance, Earth, whatever that be, I would be looking for certain characteristics like Olympic athletes, Nobel physicists, pick your thing. And yet we find this large number of people that are pretty average in a lot of ways. The manpower thing is kind of interesting because we said, okay, let's understand the triangulation capability with GPS satellites and all that was really not in place until well after Desert Storm. You don't realize that we were putting GPS in at the time, but the full constellation wasn't up until sometime later. So let's assume that they're going to follow these folks. And you start doing the mathematics, if there's thousands, and you end up with about a 40-to-1 ratio of people that it takes to go out and follow all these people around and keep track of them, and that's just to keep track of them. And then on top of that, we got to have some scientists and doctors who do the experimentation and administrivia and on and on. And you end up with, I don't know what the number is, but it's big. It is a hell of a lot of people. And it's really kind of interesting because one of the problems we have right now with the military is we ain't got enough people to go out and fight wars. We could not do Desert Storm 2 today if you had to. We just don't have those folks. We have 8 divisions in the Army left. Some of them are hollow, most of them are deployed. So when you start looking at the numbers of people that would be necessary to do these sorts of things, they just ain't there, just don't exist. One of the no whistleblower has come forward, unlike most other areas where people have come forward and said, hey, I was involved in all that. Haven't seen any of those. And the why question. Say one of the, why would you do that? I mean, nobody has yet come up with a logical reason as to why you would run such a program. Now, the other is the risk versus benefits. The benefits, I don't know what they are. You know, if they kept track of somebody for a while. The risk on this is humongous. If you ever got caught doing such a thing, you're playing you bet your agency. I mean, we're not talking about losing a little bit of budget for a while. We're talking about whole agencies going away if they were caught doing this outside of the regular constraints. Just not going to happen. There's been, up until very recently, no implant evidence has been found. And, you know, my labs are just illogical. They're both technically and evidentially unsound. And there really is a pretty plausible reasons. There is a very substantial part of our population that meets the standard causes of paranoia. And if you look in there at the various kinds of things that occur, particularly when you get down there to things like grandiosity, we have very average people who suddenly have become the center of the universe. You know, a way to do it. Things like delusions, the projective thinking, the they did it to me. It's out of control. We have the loss of freedom. The time telescoping, I disappeared for this length of time and all of that. Like it or not, that becomes the very practical reason. Now, I do think there is a very valid reason to be worried about the whole MyLab issue. Helmut Lammer is a bright guy. Bright guy. He is in the equivalent, the Austrian equivalent of our NASA, okay? He is an astrophysicist. He has a number, you go in and you look at his background, he's got a lot of very fundamental documents written in straight physics. And yet he comes forward. Now, by the way, MUFON CSE, Central European States, kicked him out because they said this is too crazy for us. And MUFON will accommodate quite a bit for those of you who are members. So you find that he has these conclusions that are drawn on a lack of veridical evidence. They maintain very strongly to those beliefs. And you try to present evidence to the contrary where you would think that somebody using critical thinking would say, you know, this doesn't make sense anymore, and yet they don't. One of the problems that you see is a psychopathology that is quite prevalent in a large number of people. In other words, you don't have to be, you know, Looney Tunes running around screaming and shouting with propellers on your hats or something like that to have some pretty unusual belief systems. So you actually have a substantial percent of what you would consider a normal population. Folks who get up every day, have normal family relationships, go to work, earn a living, and that have very narrow sets of belief systems that are real weird and would be considered abnormal. We mentioned earlier the whole issue of the disenfranchised people. There's a lot of them out there. As we mentioned, it has moved from tens of thousands to probably tens of millions who feel disenfranchised at this time. My prediction is that's going to get a lot worse. The other problem that we have now because of information technology is we have rapid dissemination of information. We got the internet, and if you go in there and just hit on some of these conspiracy sites, I mean, the stuff that's going around there is just phenomenal. Now, the other bad thing is no bad idea ever dies. That's one of the things about the internet. You cannot kill anything. And one of the sponsors of that, by the way, is Lexis and Nexis. That's where the news media go to get their information. And it's stored in there, and once it's in, it is in forever. And so what happens is these reporters end up going in and they say, I got a story on, you know, pick your abductions. And the first thing they do is they go in and they put in, you know, alien abductions, and articles start popping out one after another, and they start quoting it as if it's real. because I won't go into the news media. I'm taking them on the next book. But I mean, it is one of the real soft spots in our democracy, I think, in that nobody becomes a content expert anymore. So you don't have to know anything about what you're reporting on. But you go into Lexis and Nexis, as you people do, just do a keyword search on it. And the problem is there is nothing that comes out that discriminates, that said, this is good information, this we don't know about, and this has been thoroughly refuted. And it lives forever. Now, there is something that's kind of interesting that's problematic, I think, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how science and the mainstream population enter, because the belief systems are really quite incompatible. And there's a book called Best Evidence, and in fact a new version of it, the new edition has just come out by Michael Schmecker from Hawaii. And you start looking at what percentage of people believe in some phenomena. And it ends up pretty damn high. You see, 93%. I mean, just in things like ESP, you know, nearly half the population believes in that. And the reason they believe, in my opinion, is because they've had it happen. It was, just lost the name. It was the guy who wrote The Cardinal Sins. Come on. Who's the Catholic author of Victoria? I'm looking for that one. Greeley. Andrew Greeley. He's a sociologist, Jesuit, and whatnot, and they were having a big debate inside the Catholic Church. And it was, how much information can we allow parishioners to have about psi phenomena? And his response to them, you know, is really kind of interesting, because here we are, you know, holding a vast amount of knowledge about various kinds of phenomenology, and we're trying to debate whether or not we should tell them about it, and they're doing it. You know, these are things that happen in everyday life. And yet science tends to reject it. It's really kind of interesting. This is a bit of defense of parapsychology, if you will. What happened is the parapsychologists have been working for years trying to gain acceptance into the scientific community, and all the time they're told, well, do this, do that. You know, if you'll only do the double-blind studies, and that if you do double-blind studies, you take out the experimenter effect and all of that, you know, maybe you'll get up to being a real science. So they went in and a study was done looking at the various kinds of studies that had been done by other disciplines. In the physical sciences, they just said, we don't need a double-blind study. Period. I mean, that ended up at zero. In biological sciences, and we now know, at least in some cases, that people do influence biological things. I think, might mention next year, Russell Targ has suggested that one of our main focuses, in fact, will be on medical healing. You know, at a distance, using remote viewing for diagnostics. Others saying using it to influence. And yet, with the evidence that's out there of the influence of mind on biology, you know, less than 1% of the studies are double-blind studies. And then you get all the way down to parapsychology, if you will, and you find that 85% of them. So they've been jumping through the hoops trying to gain acceptance rather unsuccessfully. I periodically teach courses on parapsychology and study of phenomenology, and so we say, if you're going to be prepared, you know, what are the kinds of things that you're going to run into there? A lot of the events, of course, are hard to replicate, and that's a problem when you're looking at spontaneous events of various kinds. The data are almost always incomplete, and one of the problems is you get caught in this catch-22 thing that I'll mention in a minute, but this being short of acceptable theory. They say, okay, I've been involved in a lot of PK experiments. You say, all right, the spoon bent. How did it happen? Where'd the energy come from? So, well, don't know. We got a couple of theories on there, but nothing is good. Nothing that explains how mind would interact with matter, and under conservation of energy, that's not supposed to happen. How did you get there from here? So that becomes tough for the scientists. And so what they'll do is usually you'll get just dismissed. They say, well, if you can't explain how it happened, then therefore it didn't. That's kind of tough to take. Accusation of fraud abound, that if you did it, and I know Randy, and I saw Randy bend the spoon, and therefore all spoons were bent by that kind of a trick. And as I said before, we get into the emotions versus fact. Let me go back to some of the conspiracies, and some of these things are really pretty dramatic. I'm going to blast a group because they still owe me money. There's something called Controlled America. It was really quite an interesting learning experience. I said I was invited to come out and speak, and they stiffed me for the response, so I feel they're the expenses. So I don't feel too bad about talking. But if you look at, and probably some of them are here. By the way, I was told at the end of it that I was a disgrace to the human race, and a number of other things that. We start with, I'll leave the names of the people out. The victims of the new Controlled America, is a researcher into U.S. government mind control programs from MK Ultra to today. The black operations of the U.S. government experimental programs, stopping electronic harassment and scalar waves. I'd venture almost nobody knows what a scalar wave is even. Here's one that's kind of interesting. I will mention the name because I've got a couple of papers. Ted Gunderson. What's interesting about this one, and he's going to go into the CIA mind control experiments, U.S. politicians, and whatnot. What is true, Ted is the ex-Los Angeles FBI chief. And again, if you go back and you compare this with what I mentioned about Helmut Lamma, these are not dumb guys. These are people who have been in very responsible positions. And yet he's out giving presentations that are really pretty scary. Give you a quote. I had mentioned before that some of these things on ad hominem. There's a good guy that I will again take on by name, Richard Boylan, who was they stopped him from counseling. He was a therapist, but he was theraping in the hot tub with some of the female folks. The state didn't think that was quite kosher. But anyway, they said he's talking about me and anything in an article that appeared in the American Federation of Scientists. Arguably, he is one of the most dangerous elements patrolling the Earth today. They do not necessarily do these things. It's interesting, the amount of effort that will go into complete magazine in 10 minutes. You're kidding. These things are very lengthy. Some of them are well written, very articulate, and worthy of looking at. But let me go into a few of the conspiracies, because some of them are emerging right now, and I took most of these from headlines this week. Okay? Now, I know the Diana thing happened a long time ago, and you can say, what was the influence of that? Well, it was actually pretty significant, because if you remember, there were actually formal investigations that were launched, and they were suggesting that MI6 had actually ordered the murder of Princess Diana because they were going to embarrass the family and those sorts of things. That's still running around out there. But the point is, in that case, in the UK national level, you're getting resources that are attributed to going out and trying to handle those sorts of things. The national ID card, and the whole issue in the post 9/11 scenario as to how much security is enough and how are you going to trade off civil rights for security. And if you know, the global fascist, Ellison, I mean, here's kind of the epitome of capitalism who becomes that. The global fascist, the secrets of the Bush crime family. That's out there. Population, this is kind of interesting. Population and food control. The suggestion here was that the World Food Bank was going to take over and we're actually going to control segments of the population of the world where it's growing too quickly by giving them food that's less good. I put up there Frankenfoods. That's a Drudgian comment, if you will. But anything, this is part of an emotional appeal. But it's been very effective because, in Europe, they have actual laws against genetically modified food. They say anything that's modified and not natural is unacceptable, and it has affected, in this case, international policy. One of the ones that amazed me a few years ago, because I was talking to, again, well-educated people in the country, talking about the UN is going to take over the United States. And they have the prison camps are set up, and we've seen the vehicles driving around and all that. And you go, have you got any idea what it would do? I mean, we can't go into a small country. I mean, look at Afghanistan. We can't even control that. And yet some outside they is going to come here and miraculously take over a country of people who are notoriously independent and uncontrollable. I mean, if you think about what the logistics and the requirements for such a situation is, it just becomes impossible. Now, I like the ones we get down here, that the aliens and the U.S. government are together, and we've been trading technology for humans, and we actually had a battle up in New Mexico, and we went in and nuked them and had these fights, and yet there's some pretty interesting serious people start to believe that. There's tunnels. I like the one about the tunnels, having worked at Los Alamos for a long time, where they believe that they're from Mount Archuleta to Los Alamos and other places. These huge tunnels exist, and the high-speed traffic moves back and forth. And you go, did you ever hear of Channel, where we hooked up UK to France? The amount of money and energy and time it went into building one of these things, I mean, it just to be mind-boggling. This is a note that I got this week, and it's kind of interesting because it's from Azure. I'm assuming Azure is a female because most guys wouldn't call themselves Azure. I also suspect it's from the UK because of the way they spelled program. But I have no idea, who this is. And I also have no idea what in the world they're talking about. Did I advocate that microchips were going to be implanted in everybody, and did we consider the physiological and the psychological conflict that would involve? And it goes on and on. And, these things just emerge kind of from time to time. I see Bob Knight's here, and this came from something he did. I got this email. This was a little while back. Now, I'm not sure what Taxes Warfare is. That was the title of the email. It says, "To Warrior's Path." Robert Knight has a website up with a picture called The Warrior's Path, and it starts out, checkmate. It goes into the illegal targeting and torturing of U.S. citizens by covert intelligence sources. And you read it, by the way, a lot of this stuff is run-on kinds of sentences if you look at it grammatically. And it says that we're going to secretly take over the control of the government and private institutions of all sovereign nations of the world. I got to tell you, if there's somebody who knows how to get a hold of the world and make kind of sense out of where it's going, I'm for it. Because it looks like it's kind of chaotic to me. And I don't know who the they are, but the assumption here is there is somebody out there that can somehow pull all these things together and do things that, certainly the UN hasn't been capable of been doing it. And yet, they firmly believe that some hidden structure of the New World Order is going to do this. And it was signed KD, and again, I'm not sure who KD is. Used this last year, and I happen to like it as a kind of a closing thing. These are some Einsteinian quotes, if you will. The one for conspiracy theories, it was at the bottom, is that common sense is your aggregate of prejudices that are acquired by the time that you're 18. And more importantly, is there are two things are infinite: the universe and human stupidity, and I'm not sure about the universe. Having addressed, I'm going to go faster than that. Having addressed conspiracy, I would just remind you with one thing. I mean, there are real conspiracies, and just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. Thank you.
The mic is turned off. Oh, it's back on. Great. Everything comes alive when I touch it. Keep that in mind. Thank you very much for your presentation there, Carl. As well, it's knowledge that people need to be aware of when you start putting this into perspective. Do we have questions? Anybody have questions? Names will be taken too, by the way. Come on now, we've got time. We've got time for questions here. You. Okay, she does not have a question. All right. I'm trying to think if I had anyone. Well, yes, we do have one here. Hold on.
Yeah, I always have a question. In your list of conspiracies, I noticed that cattle mutilations is absent. Do you think those are real, or is that just another silly conspiracy? Are cattle actually being mutilated by somebody?
Okay, well, now you're added by somebody. There is absolutely no doubt that cattle mutilations exist. I mean, there are dead cows there that are cut up. Well, let me tell you about a case that defies all logic. Some of you know I worked up until very recently with an organization called NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Science. We had a case there. Now, the problem with most cattle mutilations is you don't find out about them until sometime later, often days, weeks, or whatnot. And so investigating them becomes very difficult. But this particular case, I think, really takes the cake. It was calving season. The rancher who was running the ranch for us went out, found a newborn calf, tagged it, weighed it, and then the calf stayed with the mother. He drove about 300 or 400 meters across an open field. By the way, we're talking 10 o'clock in the morning, broad daylight, bright sunshiny day and everything. Finds another calf, tags it, weighs it. He comes back, calf one is dead. Coming back is about 45 to 50 minutes later. Not only is calf one dead, it used to weigh about 80 pounds. It's now down to about 20 pounds. All of the internal organs are missing. The ear has been sliced off when we actually sent in for pathological analysis by a very sharp instrument. The tag is gone. There is no blood on the ground. There are no intestines. A good chunk of the meat is gone. The eye's missing. And it's been carved up in several ways. Other than that, the carcass is basically intact other than the femur, which is a short distance away. Again, the total elapsed time is 45 minutes, open daylight, a source that we believe, we had our own veterinarian was flown in almost immediately. People said, and they classically say, oh, the blood went into the ground. So we had them go to the butcher shop, get blood, pour it on the ground, and I can tell you 3 weeks later you could say blood was poured on the ground here. We have a number of cases. I won't take time to go into all of them, but there are a number that are certainly predators. There are a number that have been diseased. We had another case of a cow that was supposedly bruised, and neurotoxins were involved, and we had an investigator went in, lifted up the cow had died. Somebody threw a tarp over it in order to protect the carcass. An investigator came, whiffed it, ended up in the hospital, very seriously ill. And again, we sent in the pathologist. In this case, we found out it had a very prosaic answer. Now, the theory was that a UFO had come in and had picked up, it had been dropped on its back. There was severe bruising along the back strap and whatnot. What it turns out was that the rancher had misapplied Warbex, which in fact can be neurotoxic, and it had been put on in such strong concentrations. What you had was chemical bruising. By putting the tarp over it, they had captured the fumes coming off of it. So when the investigator went under it, he got a very strong concentration of a highly toxic substance. The learning there was, if you're going to investigate these things, you better know what you're doing, because there can be danger to the investigator. Some of them are real, and some of them get real strange. I would, if you're interested, go to the NIDS website, and you'll see some of the other chemical analysis where we found some real strange chemicals involved.
Thank you. We have a question here.
Colonel, I understand you're researching the ultimate conspiracy, and I'm wondering if you've made any progress on that, and if you can share any information with us.
I did not catch it, I'm sorry.
Actually, you're involved in like conspiracy type stuff and trying to research the subject matter. Have you been able to make any determinations of the validity of any of these type of wacky conspiracy types, except for the conspiracy I believe in?
Yeah, most of them didn't happen.
Most of them didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's where you end up. I know Jim Mars is here. We haven't had a good conspiracy, I guess, since JFK. And, you know,
Okay. We have
yeah, if you got something specific, I could.
Okay, she does.
The footnote under the program notes for you is the ultimate conspiracy. So my question is, what is the ultimate conspiracy? Have you made progress in your research of the ultimate conspiracy, and can you share any of the information?
Oh, I think it's just the whole mind control issue. And I think that the corollary to that is that there are those who say that the people in remote viewing certainly did not stop with just trying to acquire information at a distance, but were much more involved in trying to do influential sorts of things. To the best of my knowledge, none of that was researched. One of the problems, by the way, in remote viewing is that we end up with these preposterous pronouncements that have come out. The government tried to kill me. You know, they shot my tires out. And some of these are written up, which something can be called nothing less than, you know, pure fantasy. The government covered up the use of biological weapons in Desert Storm because they didn't want to pay the medical bills. I mean, this is just nonsense sorts of things, in my opinion.
Thank you. You have another one here.
I did not realize that you and NIDS had separated, but the other thing I did want to ask about, and I would like you to explain that, but the other thing is it true that NIDS has now been designated by the FAA as the organization now for pilots that see unidentified objects to officially give their reports?
Yeah.
And can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we did work with the FAA. It took us probably about a year or so in order to get this through, but in their manuals now, both for the air traffic controllers and for anybody else in the FAA, it does say if you have an anomalous event, you want to report it, call. They have a special number for them to call. We have received a few calls. Most of the time, it is not from pilots. What we really wanted to do is get first-hand pilot experiences, and there's some real good ones out there that are just undeniable. We had one recently that looked really exciting because we had two major airline pilots, both of whom saw this object for a substantial period of time, and they came in and said, held their fist out at arm's length, and it basically filled that up, which says whatever it is, real big. This was over the Great Lakes area, and the planes were a short distance apart. The timing was very consistent, and then we were able to find out that it was part of a re-entry there was a major piece of space debris. Most of the reports we get are people who call the FAA, say I saw something weird, and they then refer it to it. But yeah, that is the 911 for them. And by the way, I might mention, when we were holding these meetings, one of the reasons that we got this, we went in and I expected a tough sell, and I had been in one-on-one and talked to them first, and we went back and held the meeting. One of the things that moved us right over the thing was we had senior air traffic controllers said, we were there, this happens, and yeah, we'd like somebody to do it. But it's the difference, if you will, in general between institutional interest and personal interest, and here we were able to bridge that gap and answer it.
Okay, thank you very much, Colonel. Very interesting presentation. And the thing about the FAA thing I find interesting, because I'm a pilot type myself, if you haven't noticed. We're out of questions. Anyone wants to ask some questions? If you're out of time, not asking questions. If you want to talk to them, you do it after the presentation. I appreciate your patience on that. The FAA thing, from my observation, it could be just me talking as a not a total believer and not a total skeptic. Maybe the FAA gets just tired of it and said, okay guys, we're tired of taking your calls. You can call these nutballs out of here. It could be something like that.
It was not on their scope.
Yeah,
You'll use the expression. It was just not an area of interest to them, and having somebody who was willing to take it up and not charge them, that was the thing that put it over. Most people come in and say, we'll do it, send money.
We have a break now. We're going to break for 10 minutes, and we're going to have a panel back in here. Everybody